Okay, I'm hitting record. Recorder's on. Whenever you're ready, go for it.
This is Dara McKinley from howtoforgive.com, and you are listening to Vroom Vroom Beer with Jeff Smith, reminding you that you are anatomically designed to forgive. Learn more at howtoforgive.com.
Nice.
That's right? Okay.
Yes. Well done.
Cool.
and off the cuff. So good for you. Let me hit stop. I'll be right back.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Scott Edwards. Thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer and welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, it's Jeff Smith. Good to be on the show. I'm so excited. You've had some tremendous guests. So the question is, what the hell am I doing here?
I don't know. I don't know. I said I would talk to anybody once, so screw it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're so excited to be here, and we're going to have some fun, right?
Yes, we are. We are gonna have some fun. We're going to have some laughs, and we're going to talk about Scott's comedy stuff. So you are our Scott Edwards, and at some point we'll learn what the R stands for, or not. Maybe it's just R. So you're at scottscomedystuff.com. Talk a little bit about what you're most excited about in your business and your pleasure.
Well, Jeff, I'm so excited to be on your podcast.
Cool.
It's been a long career in comedy production.
Okay.
So I started back before you were born in 1980, and I've been producing comedy television shows, concerts, and live stage shows for 40 plus years.
Wow.
But it was just one of the rooms. I've had many veers.
Okay.
And basically, I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. But the bottom line goal is to always have fun.
You got to have fun, right?
Oh, you got to have fun.
You got to have fun. What's the point if you're not having fun?
Well, there's a lot of people we both know that made, find careers out of cubicle type jobs and sitting in an office all day and God bless them. But I was not that person. In fact, I found pretty quickly that after being fired from every job I ever had, that being an entrepreneur and being my own boss was the best way not to get fired.
That is one good way. Unless you fire yourself, which does happen.
Yeah. Oh, no, it only happened once.
And that's either through malfeasance or incompetence, one or the other.
Exactly.
Okay, so awesome, great. So let's talk about, just so you know, I was born in 1969. You can do math. But I was born in 1980, so good job. I'm glad I look younger on the beach here.
Well, you were a tad young, but I was young. I mean, I started.
Yeah, I have to think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what your child life was like when you were getting that age. I had parents that divorced at age 10, so I was doing a lot of work at age 12, and my first, veer would have been that it wasn't really forced, but I got into the workforce at a young age, an actual paid job, and hadn't to get a car and get to a job when I was 15.
Wow.
And then, as I mentioned, after being fired several times, at age 17, I started my first company. It was a small construction company. And that was where I was already starting to take that self-employment direction after the construction company. For those that are, you're old enough to remember disco. I used to spin records professionally. I did a lot of, you did a lot of weddings and teaching people how to do the rumba, right?
Yeah.
But the exciting part of my life, the part that I like to brag about a little bit, is when I was 24, I started and opened the 12th full-time comedy club in the United States.
Wow. And that was called what again? Sorry.
Laughs Unlimited, all comedy showroom.
And that was in New York or L.A. or
No, it was right here, and I'm in Sacramento, California.
Sacramento. Wow.
Yeah, I know, very exciting.
I love Sacramento. Sacramento's great.
Yeah, it's a great place to live, but I wouldn't want to visit here. What's great about Sacramento is we're close to everything. We're an hour and a half from San Francisco, an hour and a half from skiing in Tahoe and gambling in Reno. We have Yosemite nearby. We've got some great national parks and beautiful countryside. But Sacramento itself is basically a government town. It's the capital of the state,
right.
One of the largest economies in the world. And so there's just a lot of cubicle workers here.
Sure.
So it was my job to entertain them, bring them out of their shell.
But it's pretty amazing. So did you get like actual like famous like road comics showing up at your club?
Yeah, when I said I opened the 12th full-time comedy club, there were a few strip joints and jazz places that would put up stand-up comics, but there weren't a lot of full-time clubs. I opened what's called an A room, Jeff, and that means that we brought in professional-only comics. I did do open mics and competitions on the side, but my main shows, for example, my very first act, making $150 for a week of work. I flew him out of Phoenix. His first road gig was Garry Shandling.
I know Garry Shandling.
Yeah, he had the Larry Sanders Show, the Garry Shandling Show. He did a lot of movies.
Yeah.
He was my very first opening act. My first headliner was George Wallace, who was like a comedy god in Vegas. He had his own showroom for 15 years.
Yeah.
But it was the guys that really helped me get going, and these names may seem familiar, were Dave Coulier and Bob Saget.
I know both
they ended up starring in Full House and Fuller House and many, many other shows. But Dave Coulier and Bob Saget were instrumental in helping me kind of, the wind beneath my wings kind of thing.
Gotcha. So they kind of put Sacramento on the comedy map, so to speak.
Yeah, they help. That's very true. What it was the short version of the story is I was on vacation. I was selling life insurance, which was horrible at age 23 at the time, actually, and went down to L.A. on vacation. And my dad, who was a great humorist, said, "You got to go to this place. It's called the Comedy Store." And they had a little satellite room in Westwood, just off across the street from UCLA. And I went in, and I was just blown away. It was so fun, so entertaining that on the 6-hour drive back in my head, I figured out everything I needed to do to open a comedy club.
Wow.
And quit my job, went bankrupt, and jumped in both feet on the club. And it struggled for the first 6 to 9 months. It was in the red in a bad way, but got through it and came out on the other side with a really good comedy club that I grew to a chain of comedy clubs. I had 3 here in Northern California.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And then talking about, veering, my main room was running this comedy club, and it was in the 80s. There was a little bit of money flowing around next to the cocaine.
Stand-up was huge in the 80s.
Yes, yes. It really came out of its it came out of its shell, really, didn't it, Jeff?
Because of the Comedy Channel, and stand-up just was everywhere.
Well, it was so funny because when I opened, like I said, it was the 12th club, full-time comedy club in the country, and disco was just starting to fade. And that was 1980. By 1985, all the discos had converted to comedy, and all of a sudden you're seeing, Live at the Improv and stuff like that on TV, late night TV.
Yeah.
So comedy, stand-up kind of went from behind the scenes to a forefront entertainment variety act. And I got to take that ride and did quite well. I did a few veerings. I opened a couple restaurants, a couple art galleries, and late in the 80s, I even owned a submarine for a while. I built and owned a tourist submarine. That, Jeff, is the definition of veer.
Okay. Let's save that story for later because I want to dig in here. Do you remember that? I don't know the year, but I'm pretty sure it was in the 80s when HBO started doing that young comedian special.
Oh, that was mid to late 80s, about
Right.
1987, I think.
Ish. Yeah.
In that area. And
Right. Sam
it-
Kinison, I think Bob Saget,
yeah.
Bob Nelson, they were all on the same special. And I was like, it blew my head off.
Yeah, and
It was the first time you could have those people swear and talk dirty on
right.
TV.
Yeah, well, they could do their honest act.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously, when they're on the Tonight Show with Carson,
Right.
they have to be ultra clean, and Jim McCauley's making sure every joke is prime and pristine. And what was really interesting was that at the live stage shows, the comics are developing, right? They're working week after week, month after month. They're honing their jokes. I call them lumps of coal, and they work them until they have a diamond of a bit. And then they would go and do Carson, or they would go and do HBO. A few years later, Comedy Central started. You know, there was many opportunities by the end of the 80s for comics to be seen. But in 1980, literally, comics were the break between strippers at strip joints
Right.
or between bands at a jazz club. I mean, they
People would
weren't.
just ignore them, basically.
Yeah, well, it was big in the Catskills, but nowhere else, right? It was kind of a underground entertainment format.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it really came to the forefront in the 80s, and of course, it's gone on to be a main entertainment style that people really enjoy. And I think you kind of hit it on the head, Jeff, is that it was real, right? You know, you saw the stuff on TV, but when you saw it on HBO or Comedy Central, and the best way was live at a club, there was a true interaction between the comic and the audience. And what I try to explain to people, what I love about the art form, is that each and every show is different because each and every audience is different.
Right.
So even though the
that's
comic...
Right.
Even though the comic may be doing material he's been working on for months or years, that joke or bit's going to have a different reaction, whether it's a Wednesday night with 40 people in the audience or Saturday night at 8 o'clock with 250 people in the audience, right?
Right.
So you've got all these things, and that's what I think makes comics good actors, is that they have to present the material like they just thought of it.
Yes.
Each and every time.
Right. Every time.
And then
it's like a
and then they're
magic trick.
interacting, right? And they're interacting with the audience, so it's always adapting.
Yeah. Well, I think an important thing too to remember is not all audience interactions are heckles, right?
Oh no!
Some
if only
interactions are invited.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I was the host and MC. That's the name of the podcast, stand-up comedy host and MC, was the way I was introduced. I was the MC for all of the thousands of shows I produced, and I would always do the warm-up.
Right.
And part of the warm-up was not only trying to sell drinks and food and introduce the comics, but to interact with the audience, kind of get them focused, try to, have a little fun, do the birthdays or the anniversaries.
Right.
That was my job as the MC.
Scripted. It was just kind of improv, right?
Pure audience interaction, right?
Right.
I don't tell anybody I'm a comic. I used to do sometimes way too much time on stage, but I wasn't writing comedy. I wasn't trying jokes. It was just talking and interacting in a fun way with the audience.
Yeah, I get it. I went when I was in Misawa Air Base, Japan. It was my first assignment. They had like a base talent show. So this is sort of like have you ever heard of like Tops in Blue? Probably not. It's like an Air Force thing. So Tops in Blue is this thing that they pick and choose the best of all these base talent shows. And it's like a variety show. There's a stand-up comedian, there's everybody that might be in a band, there's singers, there's dancers, there's everybody. And then they do like a road show for a year.
Oh, really? They kind of got the the Bob Hope thing and got to go out and entertain.
Exactly. So I did 2 categories. I did MC and I did stand-up comedy.
Hey, I didn't know you had a little comedy blood in you.
Well, I don't.
When are you going to be funny?
I haven't finished the story yet. So there was 2 guys doing stand-up, me and my buddy. And I think, yes. And he was so bad, he got booed. I mean, they just really didn't like him, right? And they liked me because of the MC stuff that I did. I basically went up there and did like a David Letterman impersonation. And I was 18 years old, and I was playing with a band, and I was just messing around having a good time. And then I came out and did some jokes, and they really sucked.
But the audience got to know you, and
They liked me already.
relate to you, right?
Yes. But I couldn't wait to get off the stage. I think I had 5 minutes, and I got to the point where they were laughing a little and went, okay, I'm done. I realized just how hard stand-up is.
Oh, it is. People have no idea.
Brutally difficult.
You know, doing 3 minutes on stage feels like an eternity, and yet people like Bob Saget and Jay Leno and Seinfeld, all these guys work for me. They could easily do an hour. So you got to imagine how you have to have not only the material, but the personality to carry it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today's comic on stage, Jeff Smith. Yes. Take it away, Jeff. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And then you go, I'm not really funny.
You know, there's a couple guys. Jeremy Kramer is one, and there's another one, Larry Bubbles Brown, that kind of had that anti-comic attitude on stage. Yeah. Like they refused to be the stereotypical stand-up.
The clown.
And they went, Yeah, they went the other way, but it worked with the audience because it caught them off guard.
Who was that guy that did like the really deadpan comedy?
Stephen Wright?
Stephen Wright. Yes. Yeah.
No. There's guys like that.
Cerebral and deadpan and the tiniest smile. Yeah, it was great.
Right. Then you got someone like Bobcat Goldthwait that's just all over the place and hyperactive.
And the Jim Carreys and yeah.
Right. So another thing that's interesting about stand-up comedy is it's one of the few variety arts where your personality and what you're connecting with the audience with really makes a difference. You know, I always try to explain to people that an actor is reading somebody else's lines and gets to redo it and rehearse it over and over.
Right.
A stand-up comic, even though they've rehearsed in the sense that they know the material they're going to share, because as I mentioned earlier, every audience is different. You don't know the reaction.
Right.
A joke might kill on Wednesday and then bomb on Saturday. And you get backstage going, what the hell was different? And you have to figure it out or drop it and write something new.
Right. Well, yeah, I think like even the best people. I mean, I've seen Seinfeld bomb, right?
They've all bombed.
Everybody bombs.
That's how you learn. It's a lot like going back to my career as an entrepreneur. I've always taken the advice of Napoleon Hill where failures are the stepping stones to success. Yes. If you're not failing, you're not falling forward.
Right. Yeah. You're not learning anything.
Right. You're not moving.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, I've started over a dozen companies in my life, and if a few of them were huge bombs and lost me tons of money, but I was having fun.
Right.
That was the main criteria. And two, that was just part of the learning experience. You know, you have to, some people go to college, which I didn't. Others learn through the road of life and the ups and downs and how to get through them. And that's where the being persistent and consistent, much like podcasting, you know, once you get into it, if you're going to be a success like you and do it for so many years, you have to be persistent, consistent, and get a show out there no matter what's going on.
Right. Yes. I found like with podcasting, I'm doing it. I'm paying to have this podcast, right? There's no ads.
Right.
Yeah. So all the expense, right? Like the web hosting fees and the media hosting fees, I'm paying for that, and I don't mind. To me,
well, it's an investment in your joy.
It's a relatively cheap hobby.
Yes, but like I said, you're investing in your joy, your entertainment.
Exactly.
You know,
and I get to meet amazing people like R. Scott Edwards and other people.
Well, I don't know about that, but for me, I have a deep respect and love for stand-up comedy and the people in the industry. So I've interviewed everything from club owners like Bob Fisher, the Ice House, to highfalutin agents, to managers, many, many comics, but even the waitresses and the bartenders, the people in the industry have a different take on life. The waitress in a comedy club is much harder than waitressing in a restaurant, but then you get the balance of all the joy and interacting with the comics and the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody goes to a comedy club to have a bad time.
True.
And if they are, it's a bad investment on their part.
Yeah, and they should probably leave.
Right. And I, as the bouncer and owner of my club, I reminded many people that they may not be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah. I heard this hilarious story, and now I'm Duncan Tread something. He's a current comedian. Mm-hmm. And he told this story about one of his friends doing live stand-up in Australia.
Okay.
And there was a lady with a baby, and the baby was crying. And he got in so much trouble because he asked the lady to leave. Why don't you take the baby out front until he stops crying?
Polite.
Yeah, and then come back. And everybody
He got in trouble?
Shit on him. It was because of social media, right? That's common
bullshit.
sense. That's common sense.
Yeah, well, that's what's wrong with this whole woke world,
Right.
The last
he was even nice about it. He was like, I don't want to be mean, but we can't hear when the baby's crying. Love baby.
These people the people in the audience made an investment to the evening. They're there to have a good time. Yeah. You can't let a baby or one drunk person interrupt everything.
Yeah, exactly.
The worst experience I had is I was paying literally tens of thousands of dollars to produce and direct my own TV series. And we turn on the cameras and the show's going great. And we're shooting live with an audience, and Dana Carvey's on stage. And this drunk lady in the front row just starts, she's not really heckling. She's just commenting on everything. He does a bit about marrying a young wife, and he had to explain who the Beatles were. There were 4 of them. And the woman's like, who's the Beatles? I mean, she was just stupid drunk. And we're taping. So it's live tape. Right. And so Dana looks at me and says, are we going to keep going? Are you going to, kick her ass out or whatever? And I just said, just keep going. And he made a whole joke of it on stage as, well, we're in Edit City. Let's go for it. And we ended up getting through the show. But I mean, you never know what to expect when dealing with the public. Right. And one of the things that's challenges of stand-up comedy, even more so than acting, although I'm sure if you're doing Hamlet on stage and somebody pulls out their phone and starts talking, you might be a little annoyed. But in comedy, people are there to have fun, and so sometimes they feel free to overshare.
True.
But it's too bad about your friend in Australia.
Are encouraged. We don't want them not to drink.
Well, it was funny because as an entrepreneur, when you own a comedy club, you're not just producing shows, which is challenging enough. You have to be a restaurateur because you have to sell food, and you have to be a bar owner because you're selling drinks. And so to pay for everything, it is kind of important that people eat and drink and have fun. But it does sometimes work against you. The beauty was that our shows were always about an hour and a half, 2 hours long, so we could get people in, give them a couple drinks, and then kick their ass out. And then I was a smart businessman. I had them. I owned a bar upstairs, so I would pre-show them in the bar, bring them into the showroom, and then after send them back up to the bar.
See?
Don't send them out in the streets. Go, no, you might be good for another drink or a cup of coffee.
And make sure that the exit is through the bar.
Right. It's exactly what I did.
So let's talk about some of the folks that people might know that you sort of like interacted with on a regular basis. I know that Yakov Smirnoff is a name that most people don't know, but I remember Yakov.
Well, he was huge in the 80s.
He was huge in the 80s, yeah.
He actually wrote, became a speechwriter for Reagan. He performed at the, performed at the big dinner that they have for all the press.
Okay. Yeah.
representing Reagan. For those people that don't know the story, he was an actual Russian stand-up comic. He used to work cruise ships on the Black Sea.
Wow.
And he and his family spent a few years and finally got free to come to America, but they couldn't come straight. They went to France first, and they only spoke Russian, so they had a very hard time financially. And then, and he tells a great story on my podcast about how his folks were trying to just make enough money to get passage to America, and they're in France, and they're selling condoms because they could get them cheap and turn around and sell them. And Yakov was just a little kid, and well, he was a teenager, but the mom would be up there saying, here's some condoms. Yeah, here's some condoms, and use these. You're going to get one of those, and pointed at Yakov. But Yakov was
funny.
We were one of the first acts to book Yakov. He barely spoke any English. He learned how to speak English by watching TV. And when he was amazing as a stand-up comic, because not only he'd already been doing comedy on these cruise ships, so he had kind of a bit. He just had to translate it to America, and of course he could do, well, in Russia we do this, in America we do this, right?
Right.
And so it was kind of an easy hook, you might say.
Yeah.
But he was the first, and Russia was our big enemy in the 80s. I think still is. But he was really good because he was so into the entertainment. A lot of people don't know this. He would end each of his shows by singing a Russian song and doing a Russian dance in full Russian costume. Wow. Like a dance costume, like you might see from old movies, right?
Right. You got the
and the audiences just ate it up. Now, I don't know if you know this, Jeff. Yakov ended up owning his own theater in Branson, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
He still performs, but he faded out of comedy, went back to college and got his PhD. So now he's a stand-up comic psychologist.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, the story is unbelievable, and I still talk to him once in a while, and he's been on. I've interviewed him for my podcast. He's an amazing guy. But back in those days, people have to remember they weren't celebrities yet. Jerry Seinfeld, Dana Carvey, Jay Leno, Harry Anderson, the comic magician from Night Court. All these guys were just learning their trade.
Right.
One of my favorite stories was Jerry Seinfeld worked for me for a couple of years, and he had to call and cancel a date he had with me because he got the Seinfeld show.
Oh, wow.
But he was such a cool guy.
Yeah.
After the first year of Seinfeld, he called me up and he goes, "Hey, I owe you a week." And he came back and worked for the same money.
Wow.
While he was on hiatus. Yeah. I mean, he's a great guy.
And I think he really, really likes doing stand-up, too. You can tell.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
Jeff, that's perfect. You lead me into my next story, was that stand-up comedy is something that's not only important to the audience, but also important to the entertainer. That interaction with the audience, the communication, the relationship means so much. And I know it sounds like I'm overstating it, but it's true, and the evidence is that despite being multi-millionaires,
right,
both Jay Leno and Jerry Seinfeld still perform on a regular basis.
Yeah.
You can see Jay Leno
in Hermosa Beach, right
at the Comedy Magic Club.
That's right.
Every Saturday night, he's trying out new material and talking to the audience. Jerry just finished a tour.
Jerry still shows
there
up
is
in
something
Vegas.
about stand-up comedy. I'm sorry?
Jerry Seinfeld still shows up in Vegas on occasion.
Yeah. I mean, and these guys love what they do.
I think he also tours, too. I don't know if he spends that much time on the road anymore, but I know he does it on a regular basis because he doesn't want to lose his chops, so to speak.
But he's still doing TV. Just had his Coffee and Cars. I don't know if you saw that.
I love that show. I love that show.
And
you know what? Go back and look at it again. I know you probably binged it already once, but on Netflix, they went and edited it down again, right? So like the first time I watched it, it was good, but it was a little, long sometimes, right? And because it started out on Crackle and then it went to like Netflix. I think they had like this format rule that it had to be so long when it was on Crackle. So there was a lot of stuff that didn't need to be there. Now it's editing, like if a show's 7 minutes, that's enough.
Right. No, you and I were talking about it earlier. Editing is so important to both video and audio.
Huge.
Is that you have to find that sweet spot that's enough information to educate and entertain, but not so much that you bore, but not so short that you're not giving of anything. Right.
Right.
And sometimes that sweet spot is long. Sometimes it's short. A great analogy of that, Jeff, is that my main podcast, Stand Up Comedy, your host and MC, available on all platforms, was basically an hour-long show.
Okay.
And I found after a while that I thought that was just a little too long, and so I started kind of most of the interviews and stand-up shows. It's all stand-up comedy 1 week and all interviews the next week. I switch off. About 40 minutes, I felt, was my sweet spot.
Like a sweet spot. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But what I did early on was I realized that not everybody has an hour. Right. So I did a second podcast on the same topic called Comedy Appetizers. And all the shows are 5 to 7 minutes.
Right.
There's a few kind of short interviews about promoting books or something, but most of it's just pure stand-up. So if anybody out there is short on time and likes stand-up comedy, go to Comedy Appetizers. All the shows are around 5 minutes.
That's perfect. Yeah. I mean, like nowadays, nobody likes anything that's long. Like you. Well, if you're right.
If you're under 25, it's lucky to get 30 to 60 seconds out of them.
Yes.
That audience.
When we were young, we thought that all our parents were yelling at us saying you had the attention span of a flea, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know what they have now.
That's dumber than a flea. I don't know.
Exactly.
It is. And yes, I'm commenting on our future generations. Their attention span is ridiculously short. And hopefully they grow out of that. Because even though there can be somebody funny hitting his nuts in 30 seconds on a short video, that is not something that you're engaged with or speaking to you comedically or any other way.
Yeah, no.
You need a little bit of time, you know.
Yeah. Like 5 to 7 minutes, you can tell a couple of jokes.
Right, and you get a sense of who the comic or the person you're talking to is. But, you know, Jeff, your shows have that right length. You use your interviews to get the right amount of information, but they're not boring. They don't go too long. You try to keep it edited to its, well, I know you don't like editing, but, you know.
I don't edit. No. I edit by yammering a lot before we hit record. That's how I get under an hour. Just think, how can Jeff be more lazy? That's how I'm doing my life now.
Well, let's go back to Vroom Vroom Veer.
Yes.
So I'm doing comedy for 20-something years. I decide it's time to sell and move on. As an entrepreneur, you build up a business, and when it's ripe, you sell it. You reap the rewards, and you move on to the next adventure. I veered into something way less fun. I ended up owning a insurance brokerage. Yeah, and there's nothing fun about insurance.
No.
But what I did get out of it is that I found that I found reward in taking care of people, customer service.
Okay.
And so when I owned the club and I did, had the construction company and the disco and I had a travel agency and I had the restaurants and the bars and the art gallery, it was all about serving the public. I got some reward out of that. So insurance, even though it's not a fun topic, and to be honest, I kind of hated insurance, but it allowed me to be of good customer service, help people that were having problems, get them through the tough times. That's what a good insurance agent does, is he's there to support you when you need it most. And I did get some benefit out of that. I'm now retired and like that much, much more. But
I'm with you.
For the last 15, 20 years, servicing people's needs through insurance and customer service worked for me. It wasn't as fun as comedy clubs, but I still
it's got to be a lot less work.
Well, I found, that there were different challenges, and that made me grow as a person. And as I said, I got to help people through some tough times.
There you go. That's nice.
So that's a veer, though. That's not a vroom. It started.
Now for something completely different.
I love that. A little Monty Python reference. Speaking of Monty Python, one of the great characters from the Fawlty Towers and their movies was Graham Chapman, and I had a chance to have him on stage. And it was
funny?
It wasn't stand-up comedy funny. In fact, I had some complaints from customers saying this isn't, a joke fest.
Right.
But I'm a huge Python fan.
Right.
And it turned out, sadly, it was about 6 weeks before he passed away. But he's in my club, and he was such a generous soul. He shared stories about hanging out with the Stones and the Beatles and other famous people of his era, and told stories about the Holy Grail and the making of Fawlty Towers that for Monty Python fans was really, really special. Yeah. And then there was humor in it, but it wasn't like...
It's not stand-up. It's not like
joke.
Right.
So there was some conflict with some of the audience, but I, as a person and as a producer, found that was one of the more interesting shows I did. But I had Tommy Chong on stage. He's a couple times. He was incredible doing bits from the albums.
Yeah.
Big Bamboo, that album. He came on stage and did them live. He get some girl up on stage and get her on all fours, and then he'd stick his face in her ass and do the dog. Remember the dog bit where how dogs communicate? And he's chasing this girl around.
Fifi's been here, man.
Yeah. And then Tommy would whip out his guitar. Dun 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 dun. Oh man.
Yeah, he's awesome.
So that's another show that really was from my youth, and I was able to bring to a new audience.
Yeah.
Because Tommy Chong and Cheech had stayed pretty busy on TV and movies.
Yeah.
But Tommy had kind of faded away.
Right.
He's back now in a big way selling pot. But,
Good for him.
In the 80s, there was that gap where...
who would have a better chance of selling pot?
Oh, geez, I don't know. Smoking.
I love those guys. They're great. I mean, I had some of those records too. Like my brother and I get together, we can do like, what's that? I don't know. It looks like dog shit. And we just do the whole thing. And we, it's like, yeah. That was what comedy was before there was like stand-up. It was just the record albums.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jeff, what was great about being a producer is that I could bring in the people that I wanted to interact with. A guy that was huge on TV, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, and was one of my dad's favorite acts. And so for my dad, I brought in Pat Paulsen. And we became great friends. He used to run for president as a joke on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour in the 70s.
I probably know his face, but I don't remember the name.
Oh, yeah. No, Pat Paulsen. Everybody go to the Googler and put in Pat Paulsen. Another one that you may not remember but was huge was Soupy Sales.
I remember Soupy.
Yeah. Now, do you remember what made him kind of famous?
Gong Show? Was he a Gong Show guy?
No, no. He had his own show.
He had he was a rubber face guy. You're digging into the very young version of Jeff now. But I do remember Soupy Sales. That's okay. I remember him.
Yeah, but he was famous for throwing pies in the face of celebrities and presidents and all that on his show. Well, I got to tell you, Jeff, I had Soupy Sales throw a pie in my face on live TV.
See,
I'm right there with all the presidents and John Wayne and all the famous people that got.
There you go. Talk about rubbing shoulders. I hope it wasn't like meringue, because that might hurt.
Yeah. Well, and I only brought it up because, of course, I worked with the hot comics of the 80s and the 90s, but being a producer allowed me to pull people from the past, like Pat Paulsen and Soupy Sales, Graham Chapman, and present them to a new audience.
Yeah.
And then the comics that I was bringing in, my show, my club, and A Room is kind of the step before television.
Right.
So they're working my club, and then boom, Dana Carvey gets Saturday Night Live.
Right.
In fact, I was in a hot tub with him the night he got the call from Lorne Michaels to come out to New York to try out for Saturday Night Live. I mean, you can't make these stories up. It's incredible. Kevin Nealon was a regular at my club. These
amazing.
guys that went on to Saturday Night Live. But, Jerry Seinfeld getting his own show, Harry Anderson getting Night Court. For those who don't know Harry Anderson, he was a comic magician that was so funny. But there's literally thousands of great talent I've had a chance to work with. Only maybe 1% makes it to fame and fortune.
Right.
But there's a lot of really funny people out in the world, and I was lucky enough to work with them. And now, thanks to you, Jeffrey Smith, I get to share this story with the world. I feel so special. You guys excited about that? Good. I got my own fan club.
I got to get that little trick where you can just like throw on, like, do you have like all those weird sounds on there too? Like, whoop, and
Well, he's talking about my Rode mixer, and you can program things, but I try to keep it real. I don't use the canned laughter.
Oh, yeah, because that's real. That's the studio audience, right? Okay.
It doesn't really work for me. No, it's got to be real or nothing. But it is. It's been an interesting life, an interesting career, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with your amazing audience. Now, I may be, insulting Chris, who was an author of 100 books, or David, who went from being a academic and a cop to being a success guru. So, I don't really fit in those levels. Or Dara,
Wow.
Was it Dara that was the psychologist to help you with forgiveness?
Right. But you know what?
Yeah,
though?
I don't do any of those things.
This is vroom,
I just
vroom,
make
veer.
fun and laugh at you.
That's right. It's vroom vroom veer. So it's not a category of people. It's just Did you have? Yes.
They're all amazing, interesting guests, and
Right.
and hopefully this will not. I won't be one of them. I'll just be an entertainment veer in your room of podcasts.
See, so you're on that podcast booking thing. So I'm digging through the comedy people now. I'm going to just invite them all and see what happens. I don't know if they'll all show up, but I can send.
Well, they won't be as good as me, but
Obviously.
just kidding, folks.
One more thing I wanted to get out there was way back when I was like, a teenager, and I would
Yes.
look at like a guy like Steve Martin
Right.
or George Carlin, and I
Yeah.
thought they were just up there, just kind of like winging it. Exactly. And I realized, much later. I mean, a lot later. Embarrassingly so, how long it took me to figure out that just how scripted and honed and crafted those things are.
Right, they worked for years. I mean,
Yeah.
I think most people may have heard the story by now, but Steve Martin, was selling magic at Disneyland when he was a kid, and he was working on his patter and working on his comedy while
Right.
selling, fake vomit at Disneyland.
Well, that the thing about Steve Martin that made me sad was because he was so huge, right? And when he started there was a time there where you would see him on Saturday Night Live doing wacky shit with, King Tut and stuff like that.
Right.
Right. And then that all stopped. And then he went away for a while, and then he was just on movies, but we never got to see that guy again. He just stopped stand up. And I think I know why. I think he just got tired of doing that character.
Well, it's very difficult. He was a prop comic. He had props like the arrow through the head and the fake dead chicken, right? The rubber chicken and all this stuff. And he had a lot of success with it, but it's very challenging. It's actually easy to write material as a prop comic, but it's a challenge to tour because you're literally dragging trunks of crap around with you all over the country as you hone your act. And Steve had the chance to transition to movies and television, and that was his escape from the week to week challenge. of being a stand-up comic. You know, a lot of these guys used comedy as a bridge to success in television or production or something else.
Something that's less.
Right.
Yeah,
But the guys that were lifelong comics, it's a very difficult life. Think about it. They're on the road, 30, 40 weeks a year, always in a different town, always in hotels or some sleazy condo that the comic club owners put them in.
Yeah, and you're committing to have to bomb on a regular basis.
Well, because you're always trying new stuff if you're growing.
You can't not bomb. And it always feels like shit.
Well, with that, we'll end this fun conversation. Hey, get ready to feel like shit and go bomb. No, but it is part of the process. It's like being an entrepreneur. If you're not failing, you're not succeeding. So, but I really appreciate how much you're, having me on the Vroom Vroom Veer show.
Yeah.
You've had some great people, and it's an honor to be here, Jeff. And you're doing a great job in sharing valuable information with your listeners all these years. So thank you for that.
So you are at scottscomedystuff.com. So any other suggestions for how folks can reach out and touch Scott Edwards?
Yeah. By the way, the R stands for Robert. I was named for an uncle that had passed away when I was born, but my mom always called me Scott. But it was always funny in grammar school because the teacher gets up in front of the class and goes, Bob, trying to do attendance. And I'm like, who the frick is Bob?
I don't know who that is.
So the R doesn't get used much, but it just does distinguish me. Yes. So I have the podcast Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, and I plugged Comedy Appetizers. But I did mention to you when we were off air, I'm starting something new. I'm strictly audio podcast. I'm going to my first video podcast. Wow. It's called the Tag Team Talent Podcast. And that's a tag team because there's two hosts, me and a co-host. The co-host changes every show. And we're going to be sharing videos of people doing the variety arts from all over the world. And it's going to be fun. It launches in February or March. I haven't decided. But if you'd like to be a part of it and you have some talent, you can go to tagteamtalentsearch.com. That's tagteamtalentsearch.com. And I'll tell you all about it.
Tagteamtalentsearch.com. Did I get it right?
Kind of long, but it is what it is.
Well, you're not going to screw it up.
Yeah. Exactly.
And you can use your voice now to search, so it's not like you have to type.
There you go. Yeah, we've gotten so AI oriented.
Yes, you can say, "Hey Alexa, play Vroom Vroom Veer." Now a bunch of Alexas just started playing Vroom Vroom.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to share my podcast with everybody. It's been a real pleasure being on your show. And Jeff, keep up the good work. You're doing a great job out here in the podcasting world.
Thank you, Scott Edwards. This has been a blast, and you have a good one.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.